the PhD program, and he and I talked at length this week, and I would expect that he's graduating 2 years from May, assuming he can get all the homework I give him done in time. Okay, but I thought you'd be interested to know that. We want to do the unplugged part, so finally Chuck's fancy title is going to come into play now. This is the Elders Unplugged, and Albert is part of the Elders Board, but he started in February and insisted that he not be baptized by fire like what we did with Chuck. So he gets a pass this first year, and next year you are, if we do something like this again, you're a part of it. But he'll also be policing you from behind. So if you get out of line, it'll be him with the ruler on the back of your, no, I'm just kidding. So if I can get Chuck and Dan to come on up here, one of you on each side of me. This is an opportunity, well, anybody is allowed to ask questions about elders and eldering that you want to, but especially for you seminary guys, that as you're going through the process, you hear from me a lot. So I'm going to field the questions. Adam, are you in the back? You got everything under control? Okay, you're sure? All right. Oh, yeah. Uh-huh. All right, so anyway, I'm going to just field the question. I will restate the question. If you want to ask anybody in particular, just say it. This is Chuck. This is Dan. Dan did not speak today. I purposefully gave Dan a pass because he spent the last 382 years teaching first graders. It's 36 years? 35 years. Spent the last 35 years teaching first graders and retired last week. So... and the first of 3 vacations starts tomorrow? Next Sunday. So there you go. So they're going to visit all family all over the place and not worry about being home at any time. So we gave him a pass. And apparently I misspoke this morning. What I meant to say was there were 3 guys that were elders of Roosevelt Community Church when I candidated up here. Dan was one of them. But he told me, about 6 months in, that once I'd been here for about 6 months, he realized that he was really only deacon qualified because he wasn't teaching and had never taught. And one of the things we did is just like what I did with Chuck. He started teaching my home study periodically, going through Daniel. A little bit more slowly than maybe what we needed to, but anyways, and Dan, bless his heart, he sat in with me for the first year and a half. I think almost, if not every counseling session I did, almost every counseling session I did for the first year and a half. So that, and frankly, he's probably our number 1 counselor on the campus now. And so, in fact, when we do Sunday schools that are focused on nouthetic counseling, he's the one that teaches those classes. So, it's just part of training up a plurality of elders. And so, and Dan, you were chairman for 12 years, 15 years, something like that?
2000 to 2015.
Yeah, so 15 years. And so he's carried the load that Chuck is carrying now for years and years and years. And it has been my great privilege and honor to be in ministry with these guys for over 20 years. And so any questions that you have, now would be the time. I'll just open it. Raise your hand. I'll let you ask your question. Please, a minimal backstory. State your question, and if you got a particular guy that's targeted, name him, and then I will restate the question for the recording, and then let whoever answer. Joshua, you got one? Or you're just leaning forward? Sitting up. All right. Anybody? All right, we're all done. Okay, Rian. Why don't you come on over here and join the church? They all abandoned you, yes. Okay, so the question then basically boils down to how do we come to consensus, and what is the definition of consensus?
Yeah, I didn't mean to. I would say 99% of the time we are all in agreement and we move on and it's unanimous. we don't actually have a rule that says it has to be unanimous. I think I would couch it, and Dan might have a different way of saying it, but I would couch it as we're ready to move forward, and that's the way I would say is that we are all in agreement, or one or more of us can submit to that decision with a clear conscience. And so like I said, the decision for Brian to go full-time at seminary was not unanimous. If it were up to me, he wouldn't have gone. But it wasn't. It's up to the elders, and I submitted to that. And so that's the way I would say it.
Did that answer your question? Okay.
Can I have a-
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, when you're dealing with those situations too, I mean, you got three different perspectives. You have a biblical situation where sin or not, which is, we're going to go biblical no matter what. Then we come to this conscience issue. Conscience you have to work at. And then there's the aspect of preference. Well, in preference, you know what? We're going to step back every time. And that's what you got to train to be an elder, is to step back from your own preference, because it's not all about you. So, because if it was preferential when we redesigned this area, guaranteed the rugs would be blue, not red.
Amen.
Right?
Amen. Like God intended. But I will also say, and this wasn't mentioned, but I didn't accept the offer to go full time until we came to consensus, and that took months. And we had an elder at the time who I won't mention, and it wasn't. He's not in the room today, but we had an elder at the time that was not happy that we were delaying. We should definitely be going ahead with this. Why aren't you raising up an issue here, Pastor Brian? And well, he's in ministry now, and I think maybe he learned about submission to plurality as a result of actually submitting to plurality. I think at the end of the day, Rian, and if you're going to be in pastoral ministry and you're going to have a biblical view of pastoral ministry, it's plurality of elders, and plurality of elders means that you can't be self-willed. And you can't lack the faith in God to guide a plurality of men in the right direction. Okay? At that point, had I put in, a hot minute's worth of work, or whatever the cool guys say nowadays? Okay, I put in, that's not what the cool guys say? Well, anyways, so I put in some work to complete a doctorate. And the intention was to be able to make that an extension of the ministry here. And the people that were on the elders board were not all the same people by the time I completed all of my studies and by the time that offer to go full-time showed up. Okay, so, well, you know what? The last time I checked, God is sovereign and he's on his throne, and if this isn't what he intends, then, okay, then I'm better at exegesis than I've ever been, and I'll just use it here. And, okay, if you're going to be a man of God, you ought to have faith in God, don't you think? And that faith in God ought to be in all aspects of life, at all trials. And all your personal ambitions need to take a second place to what God's glory really has in your heart. I mean, there's nothing noble about submitting to a plurality. That's what you're supposed to, that's required. The only thing that makes it look noble is it doesn't happen very often. I would say that about our church. Okay, I would say that, somebody said something about preaching here in the last few weeks. Oh, you're so-and-so's favorite preacher. Well, okay, the only thing that makes me special in any way, shape, or form is that I'm just doing what we're supposed to do, and not many people do what you're supposed to do. That's it. Okay? So, at the end of the day, submitting to a plurality is just what's required. Other questions? Andrew.
What does that period where you haven't reached readiness look like for, are you revisiting that at every elders meeting and just, I know you're all praying about it, but what else are you doing to reach readiness?
So what does it look like between the time that the issue is raised and what it takes to come to consensus? Well, I'll tell you from my perspective, and then I'll let the two chairmen, past and present, give you their perspectives. From my perspective, It's trusting in the plurality and not trying to assert my will. Being ready to say, well, here's what the Bible says, and here's what I believe because of what the Bible says. And I also say that in my case, I'm surrounded by guys of great quality and humility and godliness and biblical literacy and capability and wisdom. So I don't have any question about their integrity, about them being self-willed. And they defer to me so often. I try to hold my tongue as much as I can so that I don't say this is what I want. Like, I didn't mention blue until the decision of the carpet had already been made, right? Because when I first got here, Dan said, well, we put aside all this money. We used to have, what were those chairs called? Theater seats. And they were from like Mexico or something, weren't they?
Yeah, probably a theater from back in the 20s.
Okay, the theater in the 20s somewhere, okay? And they were the seats that we had. I had a friend of mine was 6'7", that he literally had to fold himself into the seat. His knee was on his chin as he's sitting back here when I'm doing my candidacy message, okay? And they had saved up money to recarpet the place. And this is the way I've been treated since I got here. But they were like, well, the office has 1960s carpet. Why don't we just take all that money we set aside to get new pews and stuff and give you a new office since you're going to spend all your time there? Well, why would we do my office when this is the church, right? And so I just saw the deference, and especially Dan from the time I've gotten here, that I've been shown that I just try to keep my mouth shut as much as possible. And not share opinions, just share what the word says.
I'll just say that I try as the chairman to bring it up, whatever that issue is. I mean, it's sitting in our minutes, it's unresolved, and we will revisit it at least once a month. And by the way, all of those, other than the sin at the elders level, it never resulted in any kind of disunity at an elder. Even though we hadn't agreed, at no point did I feel like there was any animosity amongst the three or four of us, or five of us. So it wasn't like this is a subject we shouldn't talk about because this is going to get ugly. It was never that. We would just bring it up because, maybe we've changed. Maybe we've thought through it. There's times where we do homework a little bit, but for the most part, we're just, hey, any resolution on that. And I just don't think it has occurred all that many times, but that's the way I think I may have seen Dan do it when I was kind of the guy who was hanging out with the differing opinion, and I think I've done the same thing.
I think, like, in the context of, and I'm welcome you in here too in a second, but in the context, you brought up the COVID thing, right? Yeah. And the delaying. So we did a 4th of July event here on the campus, and we did some of those things, and we were going to meet, period. And so, okay, we spent 4 hours one night trying to meet all the COVID standards. 4 or 5 hours. There was like 18 pages, and we're going through how do we meet all this ridiculous stuff. Sorry, that's my bias coming out. But we're going through all this, and I said, I don't know why we don't just burn this, but we do want to obey Romans 13 to the best of our ability. I preached on it. I gotta imagine none of you believed that I was in any way, shape, or form further out in front of these guys. That we were 100% united, because we were. I wasn't 100% where I wanted to be yet, but I was 100% where I knew God wanted us to be, and trusting Him. Well, we are meeting, even if it's in 100 degrees and I'm preaching to the flies, okay? Okay. And when Grace came out with that thing challenging everybody to sign it, right? And I'm a faculty member at TMS. I didn't sign it for a month. I even had one of our deacons say, why didn't you sign this? Well, because the elders are not 100% on board with being there yet, and I'm not signing it until we're all ready to sign it. Period. So, that idea of contention, the only time we had contention was when there was sin involved. Disagreement in ministry, okay, is not a sign of opposition necessarily. Disagreement in ministry a lot of times is iron sharpening iron. It's beneficial. There are lots of times Dan's had really good ideas, Chuck's had really good ideas I would have never thought of. There's lots of times they gave me perspective on things that were way better than my ideas, that I just get out of the way and say, that sounds great, go for it, guys.
I sit there and I think about, how decisions are made and whatnot. And as an individual, I'm pretty compliant, that it's not really that big of a deal to me which way we go a lot of times. I'm just trying to make the best decision as it comes along. But what I can say about these guys, I'm a big, glorious, retired first grade teacher. They don't treat me as any less than they are at all. And the thing is, when it comes to making decisions, if there's something that I bring up, they actually listen to me. It might not be very often that I have an idea, but they actually do listen to me.
I remember that one time you did.
Yeah, one time, yeah. So, but it really is a neat place to be. And, I think Chuck said band of brothers. Very much so. I very much respect the men and women that fight in our armed forces. They come home, they say they have a special relationship because of that. That's the kind of relationship we have. I mean, we have been in the trenches together, we've been shot together, we've covered each other's back. It is really a neat place to be when you have men that are focused so much on glorifying God and not themselves. It is a spectacular place to be. And, when you come to making decisions, you know what? It's a lot easier. Like you say, thinking the best of these guys is not hard for me at all, And so it is really a privileged position to be in, even with my one idea.
So for the record, Dan has many good ideas, okay? Next question. No? We're done. Joshua.
I have a question on as you train up and raise up lay and then your church. What does that first year look like? When Pastor Chuck first came in, or Pastor Dan, how did you identify them? What did a month or week by week, however you spend time with them, what did that look like the first year?
Okay, so let me answer that in two ways, from my perspective, and then I'll let these guys share. Okay, number one, my involvement in a seminary has, in one sense, radically altered the guys, those young guys that you're talking about. All right. We had a guy that showed up on a forced excuse of a bicycle that just got out of, it wasn't a halfway house. What was it? It was a halfway house. Halfway house? Okay. So anyway, so he got out of rehab, went to a halfway house, and he got saved as a result of the ministry that I used to be a part of it when I was at Grace. Preaching in the rehab centers. And anyways, he got saved in that context, and he got relocated up here into the Antelope Valley. Well, he's a missionary in South Africa now, and he graduated from the Master's Seminary and facilitated somebody from there coming and doing a degree, etc. But when he showed up, he was in sweats. He asked what time Mass started, so he was brand new believer. We took him from nothing to seminary over the course of, I think, 4 or 5 years, and then put him through seminary and then sent him out. What it looked like for him, which is, that average person that comes into the church, is different than what it looks like when, for example, Mike got here, sent from one of our graduates, like Moses that we had raised up, Brian Ragsdale that we had raised up, both of them we had as interns here, sent them, ordained them, sent them out, etc. And then they spent, what, 5 years with you and sent you here and put you in the parsonage? Okay, so because of the nature of the ministry and the maturity level of the ministry and the elders here, we have the everyday guy literally off the street and the heading into seminary guy. The heading into seminary guy is a little bit more advanced involvement, aiming to invest and head in the direction of getting ready for ministry, helping you choose your classes, touching base to make sure you have your homework done, making sure that you turn it in as opposed to just do it, right, Mike? Anyway, so there's a lot of attention to the study process because you're already in a seminary context. There's also a faster track into teaching opportunities because you're going to graduate in 3 or 4 years and you need some seasoning. You have not been through a preaching lab until you've had Chuck in there with you. I think that's fair to say. Anyways, but that's what it looks like with those guys. You're fast tracking them because there's already something that's gone on to get there. Well, David came in off the street. David, he had never read a book. You know, the first book he ever read cover to cover was the Bible. Because I told him to. And he's like, oh, okay. So, and I just had him start reading through 1 John every day for 30 days, and he did it. And then I had him start reading through the Gospel of John, and pretty soon the New Testament. Have you ever read the whole Bible? No, Pastor Brian, I never even thought of reading the whole thing. Well, I think you should start reading through it. So he did it in like 3 months. And, you know, you start seeing that kind of involvement, and then you just continue to, you spend time with them, you answer questions. You're going to answer, you know, learning that using filthy language is probably not God-honoring was a surprise. Well, when you come off the street, that's what your adjective, that's the only adjectives you know, right? So going from brand new believer to maturing believer to mature believer and to engage, taking them with you and going knocking doors, teaching them how to do evangelism. And the more that they're taking from you, the more you give to them. Chuck was talking about in slow increments. Well, the first thing I did with Chuck was say, okay, well, you come to my Bible study. And after about 3 weeks, how do you prepare to do a Bible study? Well, would you like to teach one? I don't know that I could do that. How about we sit down and we'll spend an evening and we'll study it together so you can do it? Well, if you don't mind. No, I don't mind. I mean, it takes me twice as long to study for you as it does to do it by myself, but okay. Right? Listen, that's the kind of work you got to want to do and pouring yourself into people. You have to give them your time, while still wisely using your time for the whole congregation every week. No? Okay. Other questions? We're all done. Mark.
So with the elders, when you're looking at scoping out an elder reward, how long?
An elder reward? Oh. A good 20 minutes. Good 20 minutes. Uninterrupted. So what does it take? What's the life cycle to identify a potential elder candidate and move them into a position on actually as a fellow elder? I don't like the term board because that implies that you don't really doing work, but in any case, so to join the elders, so in order to evaluate qualifications takes some time. Paul is very clear about don't be hasty to lay hands on anybody, and being a veteran of having made that mistake, I am especially of somebody that was a friend and seminary trained, I am very hesitant to be quick about raising anybody up to the level of being a fellow elder. Okay? Because once you're an elder, you're an elder. I would say, I mean, I can't give you a time frame, but depending on personal involvement in interaction, not just with me, but with the plurality. See, we discuss every year candidates for deacons, and we start having we just had that conversation. Didn't we have the last meeting or 2 meetings ago for next year? Well, one of the last 2 months, we already started talking about for next year so that we start evaluating, watching ahead of time. And then we will interact on an individual level and say, hey, listen, you've been teaching, you've been doing this, and we open up opportunities for, this is very purposeful. I mean, when I got here, I was expected to do the pastoral prayer every week, to do the scriptural reading, and the offering prayer. I think all 3 of those I was supposed to do every week. And I said, well, why is it just me? Why is it not the plurality of elders that's doing that? That wasn't received well initially. And now we've expanded that to where the pastoral prayer is one of the elders, one of the pastors. And you'll notice that scripture reading and the offering prayer is men within the church. And it might feel like we're casting lots to see who comes up each week, but we try to work around your schedules too. But this is to just see if guys are interested in being engaged in ministry and functioning publicly, and giving a plurality of men an opportunity to pray and function in a leadership capacity on behalf of the church. When you come up here and pray for the offering, you're speaking on behalf of the whole congregation to God, asking him to bless the offering. Right? That's an act of worship on behalf of the congregation. So those are elders, those are deacons, and those are people that we're watching to see is that kind of ministry that at some point you might grow into. Same thing with leading music. Same thing with closing in prayer, etc. Reading scripture, teaching in Sunday school. We work really hard to personally, on a one-on-one basis, when it's a Sunday school class. Who do you have working with you next? You're next, right?
Yeah.
Did you tag somebody yet?
I haven't tagged anybody.
You haven't tagged them yet. Okay. But we do talk about who you're going to tag to teach with you so we can continue to invest in men. And as you grow, as you demonstrate faithfulness and maturity and humility and start to manifest what we talked about as far as qualifications this morning, then we broach the subject with you in a very gentle way, right, Albert? Yeah, it was. You only charged him 100?
Wow.
Did I answer your question at some point?
You got the first part. The second part was, what's the life cycle of a elder on the board or as a plurality member?
Well, I guess that depends on whether or not you make it onto Fox News. No, I mean, I have a very clear retirement plan. It's Revelation 22. Dan has just retired, and there's been no talk of stepping down from the elders board, correct? And Chuck, so you've been retired for a year and a half. You're making good use out of it. I mean, he's up to what, 17 vacations now, but and he's halfway through, maybe 10% of the way through Gina's honeydew list, but there is no limitation. There's no requirement to step down. There's no concern about term limits or any of that kind of stuff. Once you're an elder, so when Chuck stepped down because of the added level of complexity of his job at the base, he stepped down. And then we went through the full process of interviewing him and bringing him back on. And when we bring an elder on, we ask the whole congregation, do you have any issues with any of these guys? Because above reproach is not just above reproach in whether we see it. It's above reproach as far as the congregation. And we always tell you to go to them first. And if that doesn't work it out, then come to us and then we'll address it on that level. Did I answer your question yet? Okay. Either of you guys have something to add to that?
Yeah, I think I would add, I mean, there are seasons in life. Over the last 20 years, Dan stepped down for health reasons. I stepped down for some job-related reasons. And but I think if I had it to do over again, I think I would have more handled it with leave of absence or some period of time where you just get. I don't think it's an issue of burnout as an elder. It's a matter of maintaining your. One of the qualifications of being an elder is managing your own household well, and if you can't. I remember the day that the event that kind of made me step down was, and my son is here, but he's 13 or 14, and he sends me a note that basically says, it's a bunch of Bible verses in a book to my depressed dad. I'm not managing my household well, if that's the thing. My daughter is asking me where I've been this week, Dad, because you've been out of town. I've been here all week. I leave before you wake up. I get home before you, after you get to bed. I'm not managing my household well. And so something had to give there, and I stepped down from being an elder. And I think that, but it's not because the eldering, there could be times where the eldering is really hard, but we don't have built-in leave of absence or term limits or any of that stuff, but there is something to be said for, I don't want to call it mental health break, but maybe a lighter load for a period of time. We trade off on teaching so that we manage some of that throughout the year to help us, especially if we've got different things going on, and so we try to manage the load that way as well.
No, just the first part of your question, looking at how somebody teaches, we do that quite often, bringing up people looking and seeing how they teach. But one of the key philosophy things is we're looking for somebody that's actually doing the ministry. Whether it be deacon, whether it be elder, are they actually performing that type of ministry without having to be told or instructed in it, aside from what you get from the teaching and interaction with men. Something that I really like to see is I like to see what happens to you when you get hit with something. What circumstance comes into your life, what trial comes into your life, how do you respond to it? Are you responding to it in a mature way, or are you responding to it in a fleshly way? That is a really telling thing, because you can have all the right language, you can have all the right attitudes when there's not a big issue, but when the issue comes up, how do you respond? And that's a wonderful thing to be able to see as well. Second part, just to kind of give you an idea why I stepped off the elder board for a time, it was my wife's health, and it goes right back to being the householder. I need to be a good shepherd in my own household. Well, my wife needed me. It was like I could not devote the time to the church that would, be something that an elder would do. And, even since then, I'm not, and this is a really key point, at least to me. I'm not the same elder that I was before that time. I was involved in lots and lots of things that I'm not involved in now. But what we find is God's ministry for us changes over time. And I slowly get it through my thick head that that's a good thing, that's okay. And as circumstances come up in life, it's okay to change. You definitely don't have to try to keep up. See, I used to think, I have to keep up all the things I've ever done or I'm not being successful, and that's not how God works. He gives us circumstance to live in. How are you going to glorify Him now? And take it from that position and go forward. Be ready to serve Him whatever way it is. And, that's a neat thing as we see all of us in this elder board and how God has given us unique circumstances and situations and how each man has dealt with them. It's a really spectacular thing. And I really appreciate my wife in this, because this was a chief decision when I came back on the elder board, because I knew I wasn't going to be able to invest the amount of time that I did at one point. And I was at a point saying, you know what, maybe it's not a good thing. And she was like, no, I want you to do this. And that was, in other words, my desire was there, but I didn't feel like I could do what needed to be done, that really helped. And matter of fact, I hear that pretty consistently. You know, when there's a time where she might not be feeling real well, she would much rather have me there at home, which is, you need to be going and doing this. That is really helpful for me. And that kind of talks about what you talked about, how important wives are. You know, because that really is one of the key relationships that we need to guard as shepherds, is guarding our wife, guarding our family, because we're disqualified if we don't. So.
Yeah, I'd even push it a step further and say we're incapable without. I couldn't do half of what I do if it wasn't for all the things that Kath does. And I would also say this, that when both of these guys stepped down, I was not very happy. Not happy, Bob. Not happy. With both of them, I pitched the idea. In fact, with you a couple of times, I pitched the idea of, well, how about we just reduce your load or give you a few months off? No, I really need to do that. Okay. And there was no fight, there was no contention, there was no frustration. And again, listen, do you trust God or not? That's at the end of the day, do you trust God? It's His church, not yours. Do you trust Him? And I found Him to be faithful, cover to cover, and through the whole of my life. Other questions? I got 10 minutes, and then we're going to close it. Adam? What homework do I give them during the elders meetings?
Is there a particular topic where, hey, you guys want to kind of study on this because there's this issue or coming up or on our radar, or is this just, hey, for everyone's edification, like we go into that a little bit more?
Okay, so what is it specifically that we're talking about when Chuck talked about the homework that is given at an elders level? I'm throwing you under the bus here, just so you know. Okay, so what homework is given? It is normally at his instigation, okay? But it usually requires a lot more of their time than my time to chase it down, okay? We've gone through, once in a while he has tasked me, or I have been tasked by either of these guys in the past, to research something. Was it Black Lives Matter or something like that? Was one of the ones you gave me?
We also looked at the whole woke agenda.
The woke agenda, Black Lives Matter. There was something else at some point when the homosexuality thing came up, and many of those wind up making their way into a sermon subject, series, message, something along those lines. But in general, I think what he was referring to is every time we do our meetings, we typically have a subject that I either teach on, or like right now we're going through the book that I wrote that no one will publish in English. Actually, even the Spanish publishers put it on hold for a year. So in any case, and Chuck had the idea, well, Albert's coming on board, and so why don't we just go through your book? And so for the last, what we've done, 6 or 7 of them or something like that?
We're at
9. Anyway, so we've been doing a chapter of my book every week. So all the guys read it, they come in, they find all my grammatical errors, or Albert comes in with his highlighter. I have no idea what you said in this sentence. Everything else was really good, but this is ridiculous. So I have to go in and fix it. I might have been paraphrasing a little bit, but wasn't that close? Wasn't it? Thank you. No further witness questions. You're witness. And then we talk through that, or I teach on a subject. Everybody studies a subject, and then I teach on it, something along those lines. Or if we have an issue, which Chuck went through a string of issues. Go ahead.
Say that, there was one particular time where we had there was a local church that had a different view of end times than what we do, and they were, I don't want to call them, a bunch of them were starting to attend.
Oh, I forgot.
And so the elders wanted to make sure that we were tight on what do we believe about end times. So we went through, we had books and we talked about it, and just, hey, where does the view of this other church, where does it go off the rails biblically so that we can defend the faith, so that we can understand it? And Brian had more insight at the time than what we did, but that would be an issue that could have been a threat to the church. We've also had, there's been a couple of other theological things where people, I'll just say it leaks into Sunday school questions, it leaks into, and we just want to make sure that we can answer that biblically to the best of our ability, and we're all on the same. We actually had a question just recently, I won't get into details, but from somebody who is looking at joining the church, and we talked about, because we'd never explicitly gone through it together, to make sure that we're all on the same page when it comes to that particular issue, and we were, but we wanted to make sure before we answer something publicly or privately that we are speaking with one voice, not three.
Yeah, so there are doctrinal questions that come up. I think the only real issue we've ever tried to work through was the deacon-deaconess issue. That's the only one I can really remember. The rest of them have been just, hey, what about this, etc. Yeah. How do we come down on deacons and deaconesses? I'm submitting to the plurality of elders. Did I bring it back up? No. 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 No, it's not. Hey, listen, I stated, I'm on record. I think we still have the tapes of what I think the right interpretation of that is. What became what made it hard, it's a legitimate interpretive issue. What made it hard in that context was I'm holding to the position that I'm convinced of, that I was ordained under a Grace Community Church, and that is in the study Bible, and I'm being called a heretic for holding that view. And then I walk through and define the view in the meeting, and this is just heresy. Okay, those kinds of terms, that's a completely inappropriate use of those terms, etc., and it blurred the whole issue. For the record, you held to and probably still hold to deaconesses, is that correct? So there were two of us that actually submitted as opposed to just me, and submitting to the plurality. The reason I submitted, and we talked about this personally, the reason that we freely submitted is because if you're convinced that the deacon office is overseeing practical ministry, then that's a leadership function and it's contrary to 1 Timothy 2. I would be asking Chuck, and at the time Gray, I think, or what's the other? I would be asking them to affirm a view that really does compromise integrity. If you're convinced that deacon ministry, now we didn't have it set up that way. We didn't have deacons set up that. We had deacons set up just like or deaconesses set up just like the way that they are Grace. And so we had to facilitate how women's ministry works different. And I have no problem overseeing the deacon ministry. I have no problem submitting to the plurality. Am I still convinced that I have the right view? Yes. We have a more restrictive view. The elders, like the apostles, have the ability to give more authority to that deacon position because we are the overseers. There's no compromise of my integrity. Is that the most biblical view? No, but there's no compromise of integrity, so I can submit. And I don't need to revisit it. If Chuck comes someday and says, hey, you know what, I've looked at it again, and just like in Ephesians 4, you're right, then maybe we'll revisit it. I don't know. All right. And then I would throw one thing in. I saw your hand. One thing in before I go off this. When we identify, this fits what Dan was talking about, when we tagged Albert on the subject of becoming an elder, we went through a whole year with him attending elders meetings as a deacon. Now, he's already deacon qualified. Deacon is not junior elder. But we had a whole year with him attending elders meetings with us. And the reason we went to Albert was, number one, we saw his life, like Dan was talking about. When we went through COVID, actually, as soon as Albert retired and he had his whole life in front of him and Olga, and then she got really sick, we watched Albert be God's kind of husband, never complain, spend nights in the hospital on a folding chair, sleeping in a folding chair to be with his wife. That's how he spent the first, 3 years of your retirement? Right? Okay? I tell you what, that guy, I visited him so many times. There was never one time I heard him grumble or complain or in any way, shape, or form do anything other than just really thank God for his wife and thank God for even the... He was just thankful to be retired so he could be there for her. Okay, that's what sold me on his absolute character and conduct to be a man of God. And then when COVID hit, and he's spending all of his time, even before that, when he's spending all of his time ministering to his wife and calling and checking up on all of you guys as if he was an elder. Okay, that's when we all went, hey, this guy really ought to be an elder. Let's see if we can give him some opportunities to teach, to see how well he's able to handle the word and refute error. So that's an answer to both those questions. Hang on, Scott. Julie, you had a question?
Oh, I was just saying, could you explain how you guys as an elder board don't take on the whole burden of ministry on the church?
You mean individually how we don't take it on?
Yeah, how do you guys use the deacons and use the rest of the church so that you're not the only 3 guys doing ministry or 4 guys?
Oh, that's a great question. How do we function as an elders board and not just do all the ministry? First of all, we recognize that Ephesians 4 says that we're supposed to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry. So the ministry isn't us, it's the church. And we spend most of our time leading by example, but not having to be the ones that are there. And we have empowered and encouraged and besought the deacons to not just do the deaking, the serving, but to always grab somebody to be with them, just like I always try to grab somebody to be with me doing stuff, so that you just you learn based on the time that you put in. And then encouraging ministry and recognizing ministry when it happens. There's so many saints in this church that just do ministry. You know, that old mentality of the pastor is the one that has to do every hospital visit, and it doesn't count unless it's the pastor, that has to do all of the teaching, that has to do all of this, all of that, all the other thing. It's unbiblical. And to really have a biblical church, it's got to be the saints doing that, right? All of us doing that. Now, it doesn't mean that the pastors aren't, but so we've just tried to encourage that and facilitate that. You guys have anything you would?
No, just tagging on with that. We made a conscious decision, too, at one time. It's like, we are going to bring on more men to do these different things, knowing that we're going to create problems for ourselves. Okay, it's going to be inconvenient. We could sit there and do it exactly the way we want it, and more than likely do it better than they would. But that's not being faithful biblically. That's not bringing everybody in and allowing somebody to get in and to stub their toe in ministry and then have to deal with, the situation that arises is much more difficult, but it is much better for the body. So, you guys are going to be going out, you're going to be getting, bring people in. Let them make their mistakes, but be ready to shepherd through it and all the different relational shepherding issues that it creates, but that draws your body together. Again, you're doing the ministry together. So,
Scott?
One more part on when you were bringing Albert in to help with you guys. You also made the conscious point to get with the other deacons to let us know that we need to kind of step up a little bit to
Oh,
help
yeah.
out and help take over so he can handle it also. So it was more, it wasn't just you guys getting with Albert, it was getting with all of us to step up our game process to do more help to help everyone else.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, that's, yeah, we did engage you guys as deacons when we were engaged with Albert and talking about bringing him on. And we also had Tim and Bob leave at the same time, who had been longtime stalwarts in deaconning. And one of the things that Dan just touched on that also goes to your question, I would catch Bob out here fixing stuff and say, Bob, where's your helper? I know, Brian, I only had an hour. And so it just was faster for me to just do it than to have somebody else help me, because it takes 3 times as long then, plus the scheduling and everything. All right, Bob, but next time you're going to have a helper, right? Because it's not just about the job getting done. It's about facilitating ministry. I know, that's what I'm supposed to do as a deacon. And so then he would. And you know, one of the things that happens is there's always going to be turnover, right? It's just like a family. Eventually, like an idiot, you give away your daughter and she gets married and goes and moves away. And you can't undo it, apparently. And then your son moves across the country and whatever else, right? But we have more time together, which is awesome. But look, the church is like a family. And so you got to behave like a family. You're not a business, you're not a company, you're a family.
Let me add one thing. This is going to sound weird, but there are times when we actually, and this is addressing your question, Julie, there are times when we as elders discuss, I don't want you going to that. I don't want you going to that, so that we give other people opportunities. There are also times, and I was thinking about Lance, when Lance and Dee moved. I don't remember how many people showed up. We had several elders, and we, how many was it? 25 people showed up, and frankly, it was almost too many. It worked great, and the whole move, he moved his whole household in a few hours. And we recognize that even though we're elders and our top 3 priorities are ministry of the word, prayer, and shepherding the flock, we are also members of Roosevelt Community Church, and there are times when I should show up at a move. I don't necessarily consider a move something that's necessarily in those top 3 priorities. I would say it's part of shepherding, though, and it's part of just being a member of the church. But we do discuss, hey, I don't want you guys doing that because we need to let some other people do some things. And we deliberately don't do certain things at times just to allow others to step up. And I don't know that we ever mentioned that, but there are times when we deliberately do that. And that is a good question because, you know, frankly, and I'll say, from my perspective, I tend to think that I need to go do something, and then I find out when I go there, it's like, well, they got like 18 people doing it already. And I just think that nobody's going to do it, and then I'm pleasantly surprised that 3 times as many people have stepped up than what I had expected. And I think that's more typical today than maybe what I had noticed in the past. So.
When we had the latest seminary interns show up, we won't say that they showed up at the wrong time, right, Scott? But we will say they showed up a day earlier than what they had already arranged with the deacons, and Scott already had all the work days scheduled, and so it was Scott and I helping them because we happened to be the only ones here, right? And then we left half your stuff on the truck that didn't have to get unloaded, that the whole church came over and like, whoa, this is super easy. And I'm, yeah, it is now. You should have done the toolbox, man. But anyways, you know, we're all members, and it's a family, and I think that's what the church is supposed to be. A plurality of elders. I mean, think about when you're the dad in the house, right? Do you just put all the kids to work? Do you spend time with your kids? Do you help them do it, get them to where they can do it, and then let them do it and let them make mistakes? I think that's biblical eldership. All right. You guys have been really gracious and really patient. For those of you that made the trip up, thank you for coming. It was a joy to host you. Do not forget, because Gina will beat me like a redheaded stepchild, do not forget to swing by the Fireside Hall and pick up the care package that she's had put together for you and take it home as our gift to you. And for those of you that are part of the next generation of men who will be leading the household of faith, let me just encourage you, it is not a job. It's a calling and it's a privilege. And if you're not here for that reason, you're doing it wrong. You shouldn't be here. Go do something else. But if you recognize the privilege, and this is where there's no way you'd better, there's no way you can think of that would be a better way for you to live your life than serving in this capacity, then do it. Because apart from my marriage, it's the greatest reward God has ever given me in an earthly context. So, we've done all of our talking. Will you close us in prayer?
Sure. Heavenly Father, we do thank you. We thank you just for your wisdom, Lord, for your graciousness, Lord, to give us your truth. And Lord, I would pray that we would be faithful and that we would continue to be faithful because of what you have demonstrated to us. And Lord, the relationship that you have founded in us. Guide us, King, to be people who entrust ourselves to you and learn more from your word, that we might walk more faithfully with you in every context. In Jesus' name, amen.